Welcome to the Deep Dive. Here we unpack complex topics using your sources to unearth the most important nuggets of knowledge. Today we're diving into a pretty provocative analysis from a prominent voice known for challenging conventional wisdom. We're going to explore some claims that suggest a profound, and for many, a concerning alignment in U.S. foreign policy, particularly concerning the Middle East. This deep dive will ask us to critically examine whose interests truly benefit from certain global actions and what that might mean for America's future on the world stage.
Indeed, this deep dive is rooted in the incisive observations of Dr. Jeffrey Sachs. He's a globally recognized economist and a distinguished university professor at Columbia University. He's one of those, rare figures within the American establishment willing to articulate what he perceives as fundamental truths about U.S. foreign policy. His insights really compel us to look beyond the conventional narratives and seriously consider the underlying forces shaping international relations.
So, our mission today is to explore Dr. Sachs's assertion that when certain foreign leaders discuss us in the context of the Middle East, they're not referring to their own nation, but actually to the United States itself. We'll trace what he describes as a secret, decades-old plan for regional intervention and examine its far-reaching and, often devastating consequences. This is definitely a perspective that invites some deeper thought, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It challenges a lot of standard assumptions.
Okay, before we really delve into the core of his claims, let's establish who Dr. Jeffrey Sachs is. Why does his voice carry such weight in this discussion? I mean, given the gravity of his assertions, understanding his background seems pretty crucial, right?
Exactly. Dr. Sachs is, at his core, a globally recognized American economist. His academic journey, it began remarkably early. After graduating summa cum laude from Harvard College, he earned both his MA and PhD in economics from Harvard as well. And by the young age of 28, he'd already become a full professor there at Harvard. During his extensive tenure there, he directed key development institutes, specifically the International Development Institute at the Kennedy School and the Harvard Institute for International Development. Since 2002, he's been a distinguished university professor at Columbia University. He also led their renowned Earth Institute for many years, from 2002 to 2016, and currently directs the Center for Sustainable Development. So, this long and distinguished academic career, really rooted in rigorous economic analysis, it forms the bedrock of his authority.
Yeah, it's remarkable to see how deeply his academic work intersects with actual global policy. For years, he served as a special advisor to UN Secretaries General on the Millennium Development Goals, right? Actively shaping global development policy at the highest levels from 2001 to 2018. And now he chairs the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network, which keeps driving efforts towards a more sustainable and equitable world. So this isn't just an academic sitting in an ivory tower theorizing. He's someone deeply involved in global policy, translating complex economic ideas into, actionable strategies on the world stage.
Exactly. His work extends to some highly impactful initiatives like the Millennium Villages Project. That was designed to combat extreme poverty in Africa by implementing integrated development strategies in specific village clusters, aiming for tangible improvements in health, education, infrastructure. He's also participated in various commissions for the World Health Organization, lending his expertise to critical global health challenges. And furthermore, he is renowned for pioneering shock therapy policies, which were highly controversial. A very rapid approach to economic reform, often involving sudden liberalization, privatization, designed to transition centrally planned economies to market systems. We saw that notably in Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union. It was a bold, almost revolutionary economic experiment, really. Highlights his comfort with large-scale, impactful policy.
Right. And he's authored numerous influential books, including The End of Poverty. That became a landmark text on global development, didn't it? A real call to action against extreme poverty. And a new foreign policy which speaks directly to some of the issues we're unpacking today, offering a critical look at America's role abroad. He's also a regular columnist for Project Syndicate, so his ideas reach a wide international audience. He's a public intellectual as much as an academic. And his impact hasn't gone unnoticed. Time magazine named him one of the 100 most influential people. He received India's Padma Bhushan, the Tame Prize. It really underscores his global recognition and influence far beyond just academic circles.
This comprehensive background, it positions him uniquely to offer a critical, informed perspective on U.S. foreign policy. His deep understanding of global economics, development challenges, international relations, all cultivated at the highest levels of academia and international diplomacy. It allows him to make claims that, others might shy away from. It's this credibility, really, that allows him to speak to the hidden drivers of power and how he views the true beneficiaries of certain global actions. It compels us to consider perspectives, outside the mainstream narrative.
Okay, so Dr. Sachs makes this really striking observation right out of the gate, one that many might find provocative. He claims that when Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, uses the pronoun we in the context of the Middle East, he isn't just referring to Israel. He's implying the United States is part of that we. Sachs suggests that essentially U.S. policy is frequently doing Israel's bidding. For some listeners, this might sound like a conspiracy theory. What evidence or conceptual framework does Dr. Sachs or the sources present to make this more than just a provocative assertion? How do they suggest we discern this alleged intent or systemic alignment from, just mere consequence?
Well, the sources, they lay out a conceptual framework for this subordination. They describe it as an asymmetric strategic alliance. Now, since the Cold War, the U.S. has indeed viewed Israel as a primary Middle East ally. Initially, it was seen as a bulwark against Soviet influence, and later a key partner in counterterrorism and containing Iran. This alliance wasn't just informal. It was institutionalized through a series of security agreements and, crucially, an uninterrupted substantial flow of military aid. What truly stands out, the sources argue, is how this consistent backing, coupled with various mechanisms of influence we can get into, creates a dynamic where U.S. policy can appear to be consistently aligned with Israeli strategic priorities.
Right. This military aid currently exceeds $3 billion USD annually. Just to put that into perspective, that's a significant sum. It underpins the relationship, makes Israel the largest cumulative recipient of U.S. foreign aid since World War II. So this creates a powerful mutual dependence, doesn't it? Israel relies on this consistent military and political backing, while the U.S. gains a technologically advanced regional partner. The argument from the sources, then, is that this dynamic creates strong incentives for Washington to prioritize Israeli demands, even if those demands might, at times, diverge from the U.S.'s broader, declared national interest. It's a complex interplay of needs and leverage that can shape policy in, subtle yet powerful ways.
That's a crucial distinction you make there. It's not just about what's explicitly said, but how policy priorities seem to consistently align, almost uncritically, with specific external interests. So the natural next step is to understand, how does this influence actually work on a practical level? How do Israeli priorities become so deeply integrated into U.S. foreign policy, even if the U.S. obviously has its own interests at play too?
The sources highlight significant pressure from what is commonly referred to as the pro-Israel lobby. This includes powerful groups like AIPAC, Christians United for Israel, and the Conference of Presidents of major Jewish organizations. These organizations, they aren't just symbolic. They coordinate extensive lobbying efforts directed at key decision-makers across Washington. We're talking Congress, the White House, even media outlets. Their influence, according to these sources, is really multifaceted.
Exactly. These groups deploy substantial financial resources and leverage vast networks of influence. They aim to shape legislative outcomes, advocate for specific sanctions.
Even influence vetoes at the UN, right?
Even vetoes, all in benefit of Israeli policy positions. An example often cited, just illustrating the perception of deep ingrained influence, is AIPAC's alleged role in the 2004 Franklin scandal.
Yeah.
Now, regardless of the legal outcome, that incident pointed to a perception, at least, of Washington operatives serving Tel Aviv's agenda. It certainly sparked a public discussion about the extent of such influence.
And zooming out, this pattern also reveals a broader trend, doesn't it? A significant neoconservative ideological convergence. Just for context, neoconservatism as a movement emerged in the U.S. largely from the 70s and 80s. It advocated for strong interventionist foreign policy, driven by the belief that America should use its power to promote its values, including exportable democracy globally. And they viewed Israel as an ideological anchor, a liberal democracy surrounded by authoritarian regimes, sort of a beacon in a tumultuous region. This perspective provided a powerful intellectual justification for aligning U.S. interest with Israel's, even when it might lead to military engagement.
Right. Thinkers like Norman Podhoretz and Paul Wolfowitz, who became really prominent figures in the Department of Defense and National Security Council during key periods, they actively promoted this vision. They advocated for military interventions, not just to protect Israel, but more broadly, to reshape the Middle East into a more democratic and, in their view, stable region, thereby aligning U.S. strategic goals with Israeli security concerns. So this ideological current provided a powerful internal driver for policies that also happened to serve Israeli objectives.
Okay, another key mechanism the sources point to is this revolving door phenomenon and the influential role of think tanks. High-ranking officials from state, defense, or intelligence departments frequently transition to pro-Israeli think tanks, like the Washington Institute or the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, and vice versa. This constant circulation of personnel between government and these influential policy organizations, it reinforces a shared vision of common threats, doesn't it? Like Iran and Hezbollah. It ensures a kind of profound alignment in analyses and policy recommendations within both academia and government. It creates a continuity of perspective that can really transcend individual administrations and deeply embed certain policy orientations.
And furthermore, the narrative of shared security is instrumentalized very effectively. Official discourse often frames U.S. missions in the Middle East as part of America's own defense, using phrases like, "What threatens Israel threatens the West." End quote. This rhetorical framing is crucial because it justifies sanctions or vetoes against actors challenging Israel as, essentially, preventive defense of U.S. interests. The argument, even if it's implicit, is that these actions, while primarily serving Israeli strategic priorities, are simultaneously protecting the broader security of the United States.
And finally, beyond the visible military bases and the overt aid, there's a realm of military deployment and covert operations. The sources suggest the U.S. has executed clandestine intelligence operations and selective attacks that are deeply aligned with Israeli objectives, such as various alleged sabotages of Iran's nuclear program. This secret cooperation reinforces the idea that within various U.S. security apparatuses like the Pentagon and the CIA, Netanyahu's we is indeed the operational we of the United States. It indicates a seamless, almost integrated approach to regional security challenges.
So in summary, these mechanisms, the lobbying, the think tanks, the revolving door, the shared narrative, the covert ops, they form a complex, interconnected system, a system where U.S. foreign policy decisions are, as the sources argue, consistently shaped by or even subordinated to Israel's priorities. So when the Israeli prime minister says we, he invokes this transnational coalition, lobby groups, influential think tanks, security elites operating from Washington, and according to Dr. Sachs, with significant autonomy from broader domestic American interests. It's a powerful and deeply entrenched system that functions almost like a separate entity within the foreign policy apparatus.
Wow, that's a powerful and very detailed picture you've painted there. Now let's turn to an even more specific and frankly startling claim Dr. Sachs references, the 7 Wars in 5 Years plan. He speaks of a secret roadmap unveiled to former NATO Commander General Wesley Clark shortly after September 11th. This wasn't just an offhand comment. It was apparently a profound insight into a long-term strategic vision. What was this plan and what exactly did it entail?
Well, this alleged plan, recounted by General Wesley Clark himself, was revealed to him in late 2001. This was just weeks after 9/11. It came from a high-ranking Pentagon official, and it outlined a 5-year strategy to successively destabilize 7 states. States deemed obstacles to U.S. interests in the Middle East and North Africa. The sources suggest this wasn't just a reactive strategy to 9/11, but maybe a pre-existing blueprint now being dusted off for implementation. The details of this memogram, as it's sometimes called, provide a pretty stunning glimpse into a perceived geopolitical chessboard.
And the list of countries was chillingly specific: Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Somalia, Sudan, Libya, and Iran. This was presented not as a series of isolated interventions, but as a full blueprint for regime change across the Middle East and North Africa. It suggests a really systematic approach to reconfiguring the entire region, aimed at creating a new order.
Right. It's important to note that while Clark recounted this as an informal exchange, not some formal written document you could point to, the leaked nature of the conversation cemented the idea of a deliberate strategic design, one that went far beyond the immediate reactive response to the September 11th attacks. It suggested a pre-existing ideological framework driving these actions, almost as if 9/11 provided the justification, the catalyzing event for a plan already conceived.
So the obvious question then becomes, what was the ideological foundation for such an ambitious multi-front plan? I mean, where did this kind of thinking originate? That would envision systematic regime change across an entire region.
The sources point directly to the neoconservative movement, and specifically the Project for the New American Century, or PNAC. Co-founded back in 1997 by prominent figures like William Kristol and Robert Kagan. PNAC explicitly advocated for a foreign policy centered on preserving and extending global U.S. leadership through the overwhelming application of military force. They fundamentally believed in American exceptionalism and the necessity of military might to shape the world in accordance with U.S. values and interests. They saw American power as a force for good that should be proactively used.
Their key report, Rebuilding America's Defenses, published in 2000, is particularly illustrative, isn't it? It famously suggested that catalyzing events like a new Pearl Harbor would be needed to justify profound transformations in U.S. power projection and military spending. This effectively laid the doctrinal groundwork for aggressive regime change campaigns. It anticipated a rationale for significant military action long before 9/11 provided that perceived catalyzing event. It's almost chilling, like they foresaw a need for a major event to push their agenda forward.
And this leads directly to the logic of sequential regime change. The idea of attacking one state after another, it reflects a scheme of continuous power projection designed to achieve specific geopolitical outcomes. Each intervention, they believed, was intended to create politically friendly spaces where Washington could establish bases, cultivate local allies, or expand spheres of influence. The ultimate goal was to fragment and impose a new regional order, systematically eliminating perceived threats or obstacles to U.S. and allied interests. It was meant to be a step-by-step process towards a grand regional reordering.
And concepts like preventive war, striking first to neutralize a perceived future threat, and the shock and awe doctrine, which we famously saw launched in Iraq in 2003, they were part of this, weren't they? These were designed to achieve rapid and decisive demoralization of the opponent, intended to minimize resistance and ensure quick victories. However, the sources note, and history seems to bear out, that in practice, these doctrines often generated the opposite effects. They led to prolonged conflicts, widespread insurgency, and unforeseen blowback rather than swift resolutions and stability.
And what about the operational dimension and the delays? The plan envisioned a rapid pace, a quick succession of victories, 5 years, 7 countries. However, as reality set in, local resistance from unexpected quarters, the intervention from rival powers like Russia in Syria or Iran backing Hezbollah in Lebanon, and the emergence of stubborn insurgencies, they either significantly delayed or entirely eroded the effectiveness of each campaign. The actual execution deviated sharply from the theoretical blueprint, demonstrating the sheer unpredictability of real-world conflicts.
Yeah, the discrepancy between the neoconservative doctrine of lightning victories and installing allied democracies versus the grim reality of asymmetrical warfare. It's stark. This, the sources explain, is precisely why 6 of the 7 wars became, in Sachs's words, failed projects of reconstruction and stabilization, leading to chaos and prolonged conflict rather than the intended order and democratic transitions. It's a powerful indictment of the underlying assumptions, really.
Right. And placing this in a wider context, this represents a long-term geopolitical vision. This approach treats the Middle East not as a series of isolated crises, but as a singular chessboard for reshaping strategic alignments. Neutralizing real or potential threats like terrorism or Iranian influence, securing vital energy routes, and ideologically containing rival powers. It's a grand strategy for regional dominance that fundamentally sees the region as a battleground for U.S. hegemony.
And the programmatic nature of the plan, the way it seems to extend beyond individual administrations, it suggests that for its architects, it was an imperial continuum designed to ensure U.S. hegemony in the region for the foreseeable future. It implies a deeply embedded, consistent policy objective that transcends presidential terms, regardless of who occupies the White House.
So, in sum, the 7 Wars in 5 Years plan, as described, embodies a doctrine of systematic regime change, driven by a neoconservative ideology that views military force as the primary tool for global order. And despite its chaotic and arguably counterproductive execution in practice, conceptually, it continues to define how certain power groups have sought to reconfigure the political map of the Middle East and North Africa, often with devastating human and geopolitical consequences.
Okay, Dr. Sachs states, and quite pointedly, that the U.S. has been engaged in 6 of those 7 wars till now. A long plan delayed because every one of those turned into a complete debacle. This is where the rubber really meets the road, isn't it? It's not just about a theoretical plan existing, but about its, catastrophic implementation and the real-world suffering it caused.
The idea of 6 wars executed, 1 pending, reveals a clear pattern of sequential intervention with cumulative effects and recurring bitter lessons of failure. This was designed as a chain of interventions. After Iraq, Syria, then Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, finally Iran. It wasn't meant to be about isolated crises, but a grand design to reconfigure the entire regional chessboard, aiming for a domino effect of regime change and a new U.S.-friendly order.
Right. Let's break down the debacle part because Dr. Sachs's choice of words here is precise and damning, especially given the stated objectives of these interventions. First, Iraq in 2003. The overthrow of Saddam Hussein led to a profound power vacuum. It fueled intense sectarian conflict, the devastating rise of ISIS, and the catastrophic collapse of state institutions. The shock and awe campaign didn't eliminate insurgent networks as promised, it inadvertently strengthened them, initiating a cycle of endemic violence that persists to this day. Far from any notion of quick victory or liberation. Next, Libya in 2011. The fall of Muammar Gaddafi didn't bring stability or democracy. Instead, it led to the severe fragmentation of territory among rival militias and a persistent civil war that has torn the country apart and destabilized the broader Sahel region. Then Syria, since 2011. This conflict quickly became a complex, multi-sided proxy war. Powerful external powers like Russia, Iran, and Turkey got involved, complicating any stabilization effort, transforming it into an intractable, seemingly endless conflict with immense humanitarian costs. For Somalia and Sudan, years of indirect interference, including logistical support and sanctions, failed to halt internal conflicts or avert severe humanitarian crises. This led to ongoing instability, widespread displacement, and profound suffering in both nations. And finally, Lebanon from 2006 and beyond. Although there was no full-scale invasion, sustained military and economic pressures deepened political instability and, paradoxically, empowered Hezbollah, making it a dominant political and military force in the country, pretty much the opposite of stated U.S. goals.
Crucially, the sources assert that none of these episodes achieve their stated objectives, bringing stability, democracy, or securing U.S. interests in the long term. Instead, each intervention sowed more instability, fractured societies along ethnic and sectarian lines, and fostered new centers of violence, creating what can only be described as a trail of failed states or protracted conflicts that continue to generate instability across the region.
Yeah, this consistently speaks to what's often called a blowback effect, the unintended negative consequences of a political action. Each war left severe unintended consequences that complicated the next, creating a cascade of instability. The power vacuum in Iraq, for instance, fueled terrorist networks that then metastasized and spread into Syria. Libya's disintegration drove massive migration and smuggling flows into neighboring countries like Niger and Chad, further complicating regional security missions and contributing to broader instability in North Africa. And radicalization in Somalia provided a recurring pretext for the establishment of new drone bases and ongoing military actions, perpetuating a cycle of intervention rather than bringing resolution.
This cycle of self-reinforcing chaos showcases the inherent, often self-destructive logic of successive interventions without a clear, sustainable, long-term political strategy. The sources highlight the fundamental mismatch between the neoconservative doctrine of express victory and shock and awe, which drastically underestimated or completely failed to account for social resilience, deeply entrenched tribal structures, or the unavoidable involvement of external actors and rival powers. It was a plan based on, well, fundamentally flawed assumptions about how societies respond to external force.
The temporal disconnect, the massive delays, fierce local resistance, and proactive actions by rival powers, it shattered the neat, optimistic idea of conquering one country after another in 5 years. This left bitter lessons about the fundamental impossibility of imposing a desired order without a sustainable, locally supported political project and genuine buy-in from the affected populations, a component that was consistently missing from these interventions.
Right. And this brings us to Iran, the final step and arguably the biggest challenge of that original scheme. With 6 interventions already resulting in failed states or prolonged proxy wars, Iran represents the remaining symbolic and strategic objective of that initial plan. Directly attacking the Islamic Republic would mean confronting a consolidated state with significant regional response capabilities and strong alliances, making this 7th war the ultimate and potentially most catastrophic test of that initial scheme. It's a very high-stakes gamble in an already volatile region.
So for you, the listener, what does this all mean? The pattern of 6 executed wars not only reveals a clear design of sustained power projection, but also the unavoidable dynamic of backlash generated by each failed intervention, which then multiplies its own impact. The pending war against Iran fits into this cycle, but perhaps it's also an opportunity for a broader reevaluation, to rethink a model whose effectiveness has proven increasingly dubious and whose costs, as we're about to discuss, have been truly immeasurable. Dr. Sachs clearly states that every one of those those turned into a complete debacle, contrasting sharply with the promises of how wonderful these wars would be. This point really deserves a deeper dive, as it highlights the profound disconnect between the rhetoric of intervention and its devastating reality on the ground.
Mm-hmm. The notion of quick victories or liberation completely clashes with the reality of these conflicts. They've consistently generated recurring patterns of failure. The promises of swift, decisive outcomes they were never met. Instead, we saw prolonged instability, unforeseen consequences, and a cycle of violence that became self-perpetuating.
Let's look at specific examples of the chaos and insurgency. In Iraq, after 2003, Saddam Hussein's overthrow created a profound power vacuum that fueled rampant sectarian struggles between Shia and Sunni factions and facilitated the explosive expansion of groups like ISIS, a violent extremist organization that quickly gained control over vast territories. The shock and awe campaign didn't eliminate insurgent networks. Rather, it inadvertently strengthened them by creating the very conditions for their growth, embedding the country in a cycle of endemic violence that persists to this day, far from any promised peace or stability.
And this leads directly to massive humanitarian crises and widespread displacement. The war in Syria, for instance, escalated into an unimaginable humanitarian catastrophe. We're talking 500,000 dead and almost 13 million internally displaced or refugees. That's more than half of the country's pre-war population. The systematic destruction of basic infrastructure, hospitals, schools, homes, and the collapse of essential services have left much of the population reliant on international aid which is often tragically insufficient for the sheer scale of the crisis. Entire cities reduced to rubble, millions losing everything. It's just devastating.
And the effect on state stability is profound and long-lasting. In Libya, the fall of Muammar Gaddafi in 2011 didn't bring stability as initially hoped. Instead, it led to the severe fragmentation of the territory among rival militias and a persistent civil war that continues to destabilize the region, with various factions vying for power. The Fragile State Index starkly illustrates this. It shows a dramatic jump in Libya's fragility score from a problematic but somewhat stable 68.7 to a near-catastrophic 97.0 points within a single decade. This is a clear and undeniable sign that the country transitioned from an autocratic dictatorship to a state of profound anarchy and entrenched armed rivalries, far from the democratic aspirations.
Right. And placing this in a wider context, these failures weren't isolated incidents. They were deeply interconnected, creating a chain reaction across the region. The pervasive disorder and power vacuum in Iraq facilitated the advance of militias into Syria, exacerbating that conflict. Libyan instability, fueled by the conflict, directly fed smuggling routes and massive migration flows towards Niger and Chad, overwhelming their already fragile systems. And operations in Sudan and Somalia, instead of bringing resolution, served as fertile breeding grounds for covert actions and sanctions that only deepened local crises, creating a ripple effect of instability that continues to reverberate across the continent.
So, far from establishing allied democracies or protecting strategic interests, each intervention has systematically undermined governance, created deep social fractures, and fueled new sources of instability, often empowering the very extremist groups they claim to target. This consistently reinforces the perception that military solutions, when applied in isolation or without a comprehensive and sustainable political strategy, are often sterile, counterproductive, and ultimately self-defeating, leading to more harm than good. Okay, this discussion wouldn't be complete without examining the role of what Dr. Sachs refers to as the military-industrial complex and the deep state. He asserts that these elites finance and sustain conflicts to perpetuate their benefits, alien to citizen interest. It's a powerful accusation about where true power might lie and who truly profits from prolonged conflict.
What's crucial here is understanding the origins and nature of these concepts. The term military-industrial complex was famously coined by President Dwight D. Eisenhower in his 1961 farewell address. He used it to describe the powerful, symbiotic alliance between the Department of Defense, the arms industry, and Congress. Their reciprocal interests inherently tend to perpetuate high defense budgets and continuous military operations. What truly stands out, as Eisenhower warned, is that its very design makes it a kind of self-feeding beast, suggesting that conflict isn't just a political or strategic decision, but often an economic imperative for those within this powerful alliance, perpetuating defense spending regardless of the evolving threat landscape.
And the deep state. How do we define that in this context? What makes it distinct from the visible elected government?
Well, the deep state refers to an informal but influential network of high-ranking bureaucrats. These include career military officials, intelligence agency personnel, think CIA, NSA experienced career diplomats, and national security advisors. They operate with significant autonomy and continuity, often persisting in their roles and influence beyond the tenure of elected governments, thereby deeply influencing strategic decision-making and foreign policy, and sometimes maintaining consistent policy directions across different administrations.
So breaking this down, who are the main actors driving this powerful system beyond just abstract concepts? Who are the individuals and organizations that comprise this complex and deep state?
Well, you're talking about major defense contractors like Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman. For these behemoths, armament sales, maintenance contracts, security services, they translate into multi-billion-dollar profits annually, creating a direct financial incentive for a robust and active defense sector. Then there are the high-ranking military commanders and the leadership of intelligence agencies, the Pentagon, CIA, NSA. They consistently seek to maintain and increase their resources, expand their missions, and secure broader legal authorizations for the use of military force. They have a vested interest in a world that requires their capabilities and validates their strategic importance.
And we certainly can't forget key legislators, can we? These are members of crucial defense committees in both the Senate and the House. They often receive substantial campaign donations from the defense industry and, in turn, promote local contracts and defense spending that secure jobs in their districts, creating a powerful economic incentive to support the industry's objectives within their constituencies. It's a very reciprocal relationship.
That's right. So one might then ask, what are the specific mechanisms through which they exert their influence? The sources detail extensive lobbying and campaign donations. Defense companies spend hundreds of millions annually to influence legislators and ensure the drafting of budget clauses favorable to their interests. It's a continuous, well-funded effort to shape policy from the inside.
Then there's the pervasive revolving door phenomenon. This is where military or intelligence officials, upon retiring or leaving government service, seamlessly transition to lucrative positions within private arms industries, and sometimes even vice versa. This constant circulation blurs the lines between regulators and the regulated, ensuring a consistent alignment of perspectives and interests. It creates a powerful consensus around continued military engagement.
And the crucial role of think tanks and expert groups cannot be overstated. Foundations like the Center for New American Security or the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, they produce a steady stream of studies, reports, policy recommendations. These publications often serve to legitimize military interventions and advocate for increased defense spending. They provide intellectual justification for the actions favored by the military-industrial complex and promote a certain worldview within policy circles.
So beyond the structural aspects, what are their underlying motivations? It's not just about abstract power, is it? It seems to be rooted in something much more tangible.
Primarily, it's about economic profitability. War and geopolitical tension guarantee not only initial sales of equipment, but also continuous maintenance contracts, the need for deployments, ongoing equipment modernization. For the security bureaucracy, controlling geopolitical areas through forward basing or other means directly reinforces and expands their role in foreign policy. There's also a pervasive bias towards a permanent threat narrative, whether it's terrorism, rogue states, or rival global powers. That conveniently justifies unlimited budget expansion and executive authority, ensuring their continued relevance and funding. It's a system designed to perpetuate itself.
And the disconnection from citizen interest. Dr. Sachs makes a strong point here, suggesting that the priorities of these elites, continuous resource flow and prolonged conflicts, are starkly different from those of average citizens. Citizens bear the brunt of the consequences, right, including collateral casualties from military operations, the diversion of vast funds from essential domestic needs like education and healthcare, and a profound lack of transparency because so much of this activity remains classified under state secrecy. It really raises the question of accountability.
This creates a self-reinforcing cycle. Each military intervention generates new security interests, which can mean low-intensity wars, the establishment of permanent bases, or the expansion of surveillance programs, all of which further fuel the demand for more spending and more power for the complex and the deep state. The media and certain segments of the political debate often reproduce these alarmist narratives, which hinders the development of alternative security visions and severely limits public scrutiny and accountability. Makes it difficult for the public to question the underlying assumptions.
In essence, Dr. Sachs argues that the military-industrial complex and the deep state form a self-perpetuating system. The more is invested in war capabilities and intelligence operations, the more justifications are generated to increase them, maintaining conflicts and tensions that are, as he contends, detached from the well-being and democratic priorities of civil society. It's like a machine that feeds itself, often at the public's expense. Okay, Donald Trump campaigned on an America First platform. He promised non-interventionism and an end to what he called endless wars. Yet, Dr. Sachs points out that Trump has fallen completely into line regarding the seventh war Iran. This is a profound contradiction that really demands our attention. How can we conceptually understand this alleged betrayal of America First under Trump's presidency, particularly concerning Iran?
Yeah, this is a critical point as it highlights a perceived divergence between rhetoric and actual policy implementation. The sources highlight four main vectors that illustrate this apparent inconsistency in Trump's approach to Iran.
First, there's the striking contrast between his anti-interventionist rhetoric and his often, bellicose actions. A key example is his unilateral withdrawal from the Iran nuclear deal, the JCPOA, back in May 2018. This was despite his America First slogan promising to avoid new tensions and foreign entanglements. He then immediately reimposed and dramatically expanded sanctions that had been lifted under the Obama administration, directly escalating economic pressure on Iran, seemingly contradicting his non-interventionist stance. He also signed the Kayatsa Act in 2017, that's the Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act, which imposed broad sanctions on Iran as well as Russia and North Korea. Now, while he publicly expressed displeasure with certain aspects of this bipartisan legislation, he nevertheless maintained and reinforced these sanctions to bolster his confrontation with Tehran. This action, despite his stated desire to avoid costly foreign entanglements, demonstrably intensified economic warfare against Iran. Okay, this leads to the second factor, the massive reimposition of economic sanctions. After the assassination of Qasem Soleimani in January 2020, the U.S. Treasury sanctioned key Iranian industries, including metals, manufacturing, textiles, transportation, and numerous high-ranking regime officials. This significantly deepened the economic strangulation of the country, impacting its ability to conduct international trade and access vital resources.
Right, and these sanctions, while aimed at the regime, had a significant and often devastating impact on the civilian population. They drove hyperinflation and severely restricted access to essential goods like medicine and food, directly contradicting the America First promise to focus on American domestic well-being and implying perhaps a disregard for the humanitarian consequences of such policies. It highlights a painful trade-off between geopolitical pressure and human welfare.
Thirdly, we saw a notable increase in covert operations and selective attacks under his watch. The assassination of Qasem Soleimani on January 3, 2020, ordered by Trump without prior congressional consultation. That was a drone strike that eliminated the Quds Force commander. This audacious action dramatically escalated regional tensions far beyond what could be considered a surgical action and risked a broader conflict, potentially drawing the U.S. into another Middle East war.
And there was clear, undeniable cooperation with Israel during this time. U.S. support and coordination in operations against Iranian nuclear facilities, such as those at Fordow, Natanz, Esfahan. They were conducted in parallel with Israel, often in joint efforts. This consistent and often covert collaboration reinforced the image of Trump as an executor of a policy that, contrary to his anti-entanglement rhetoric, actually aligned closely with long-standing Israeli strategic objectives concerning Iran.
Finally, this created a significant disconnection with his own political base and, arguably, the national interest. Many sectors of the MAG movement who had passionately supported his anti-interventionist stance openly criticized the escalation against Iran. They viewed it as a direct contradiction of his core promise to avoid new wars and prioritize Americans over external agendas, leading to a sense of betrayal and disillusionment among some supporters. This erosion of credibility was palpable. By consistently aligning his decisions with external geopolitical interests, particularly those defined by allies like Israel, Trump significantly undermined the trust of those who voted for him specifically to curb interventions and decisively prioritize domestic economy and security above all else. His actions often contradicted his own campaign promises, creating a powerful narrative of inconsistency. In essence, under the guise of America First, Trump ended up reinforcing sanctions, authorizing selective assassinations, and participating in covert military operations against Iran. This set of actions, according to the sources, shows a clear divergence between his anti-interventionist discourse and the continuity, even intensification, of a bellicose agenda. An agenda that, Sachs argues, stretches from Ronald Reagan to George W. Bush and Barack Obama, ultimately delegitimizing the notion of a true shift towards exclusive exclusively defending U.S. interests. So what does all this interventionism truly cost? Not just in abstract terms, but in tangible, devastating impacts. Dr. Sachs does not hold back here. He states the U.S. has spent trillions of dollars, lives, and the utter destruction of world trust in the United States. This isn't just a critique, it's a profound indictment of American foreign policy over the past decades.
Yeah, the accumulation of successive military operations across the Middle East and North Africa has indeed led to devastating impacts on three interconnected levels: human, financial, and reputational costs, each feeding into a larger narrative of decline and profound unintended consequences. These aren't just statistics. They represent immense suffering and long-term global shifts.
Let's start with the human cost, which is perhaps the most tragic and indelible. The post-9/11 wars, often collectively referred to as the War on Terror, have resulted in unimaginable suffering and loss of life across multiple continents. Conservative estimates, like those compiled by the Costs of War Project at Brown University, suggest that between 480,000 and 507,000 deaths have occurred in the overall conflict zones. This staggering figure encompasses not only combatants from all sides, but also countless civilians caught in the crossfire and support personnel whose lives were lost.
In Iraq alone, various credible sources converge on a grim toll of 150,000 to 200,000 direct deaths, a count that includes both civilians and insurgents. Beyond that, the direct cost to American military lives is also significant, with over 4,400 U.S. casualties in Iraq, reflecting direct combat deaths. Additionally, nearly 7,000 U.S. service members have died across the broader theaters of Iraq and Afghanistan. Tens of thousands more wounded. And beyond physical wounds, many veterans continue to suffer from profound psychological scars, PTSD, moral injury, a hidden cost that persists long after the fighting stops and burdens families and communities. Furthermore, the interventions have forcibly displaced millions of people from their homes, turning them into internal refugees or creating massive waves of refugees seeking asylum in other countries, fueling humanitarian crises across the entire region and straining resources and compassion globally.
Then there are the staggering financial costs. The economic outlay for these wars, it far exceeds initial projections, growing into sums that are almost incomprehensible to the average taxpayer. Studies by the highly respected Brown University Costs of War Project estimate an accumulated expenditure of a colossal $8 trillion over 2 decades of conflicts. To truly grasp that number, think about it. This isn't just annual military budgets, it's the full long-term cost, including veterans care, debt interest, and reconstruction efforts that never fully materialized.
Yeah, to put that into even starker perspective, specifically the cost of the Iraq invasion alone has been estimated at $3 trillion when you include macroeconomic impacts and debt financing. Other, even broader, estimates reach $6.4 trillion when factoring in long-term reconstruction efforts still ongoing, the immense decade-long cost of veteran care and benefits for those wounded in body and mind, and the interest accrued on the national debt incurred to fund these wars. These amounts are truly staggering. They equate to allocating resources comparable to the entire U.S. defense budget, multiplied several times over year after year, fundamentally at the expense of crucial domestic investments in education, public health, vital infrastructure, even research and development that could secure America's future prosperity, and the profound opportunity costs for the nation.
And finally, perhaps most insidiously for America's long-term standing, are the reputational costs. The global perception of the United States as a benevolent promoter of a just international order, a beacon of democracy and stability, it has drastically eroded. According to an Ipsos survey from April 2025, the proportion of citizens in 29 countries who believe the U.S. will exert a positive influence on world affairs fell significantly, from 59% in October 2024 to a mere 46% in April 2025. That indicates a sharp and rapid decline in global confidence in U.S. leadership and intentions.
Similarly, while a majority of 34 nations still view the U.S. favorably at 54%, that figure itself shows clear signs of decline compared to previous years, indicating a consistent downward trend in global approval and trust. This pervasive loss of trust profoundly undermines Washington's ability to forge effective international coalitions, to exert soft power through persuasion and cultural influence, and to successfully launch vital multilateral initiatives ranging from crucial climate change efforts to global pandemic responses. This creates a deep and pervasive legitimacy deficit that, according to the sources, could take decades to recover, fundamentally reshaping America's standing and influence in the world. I mean, when Washington finds itself unable to lead on global issues like climate change or pandemics simply because its word no longer carries the same weight, it means the world as a whole struggles to tackle shared crises effectively.
So for you, the listener, what does this all mean? The U.S. used to be seen, perhaps, as a force for good, a beacon of democracy. But now, much of the Global South views it, according to Sachs, as something closer to a rogue state, unpredictable, interventionist, and controlled by hidden interests not aligned with global well-being. Even traditional allies are showing signs of turning away, seeking alternatives. This raises a crucial question. If the U.S. is losing its global standing, what's taking its place? And what does this new landscape of international relations truly look like?
Right.
With the U.S. facing these significant costs and a collapse in global trust, Dr. Sachs points to a crucial development, the emergence of a new international order. This isn't just a minor shift, it's a fundamental rebalancing of global power, presenting both challenges and new dynamics for the future.
Indeed. The sources describe a clear decline of unipolarity and the accelerating rise of multipolarity. After the Cold War, the U.S. enjoyed a brief, unparalleled unipolar moment where it stood as the sole superpower with unmatched economic, military, diplomatic influence. However, failed interventions in the Middle East, coupled with the profound economic shock of the 2008 financial crisis, critically eroded that preeminence. This paved the way, opening significant space for a multipolar world where several powers now share and contend for global influence rather than one dominant actor, creating a more complex and competitive international system.
And this brings us directly to the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, and their institutional alternatives. They seem to be forming a coherent bloc, challenging the existing Western-led global structures. What is their objective?
Well, the BRICS bloc has evolved significantly from what was initially primarily an economic forum. It has transformed into a robust political actor, actively pushing for fundamental reforms within key global governance bodies like the G20 and the United Nations. Their consistent objective is to promote a more inclusive international order, one that specifically champions the interests and voices of the Global South, advocating for greater representation and fairness in global decision-making. Its recent expansion, with new members joining as BRICS plus SPERT, further strengthens this claim, making it an even more formidable voice on the world stage, with a larger share of global GDP and population.
We're also seeing moves towards de-dollarization and the creation of their own financial mechanisms. This directly challenges the long-standing global financial architecture dominated by Western institutions. What are the practical implications of this?
Yeah, initiatives like the New Development Bank, which acts as an alternative to traditional Western-led institutions like the IMF and World Bank, and the development of the BRICS payment system. They exemplify explicit efforts to reduce global dependence on the U.S. dollar for trade and finance. These moves aim to create alternative South-South financing networks that operate without the political or economic conditionalities typically imposed by Western financial bodies. It's a direct challenge to the dollar's hegemony and the existing financial order, seeking to create greater financial autonomy for non-Western nations.
And beyond BRICS, various regional organizations and South-South cooperation initiatives are gaining significant traction, aren't they? Demonstrating a broader shift in global collaboration away from traditional Western-centric models.
Absolutely. Organizations such as the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, SCO, which focuses on security and economic cooperation in Eurasia, the China-Africa Forum, FOCAC, the African Union. They are actively strengthening platforms for dialogue and fostering large-scale infrastructure projects. These include China's massive Belt and Road Initiative and numerous clean energy projects, all of which increasingly bypass traditional Western filters and funding mechanisms, allowing for direct collaboration among non-Western nations and reshaping global trade and infrastructure development.
What's fascinating here is their underlying principle, a strong emphasis on non-intervention and respect for sovereignty. This is a stark contrast to the interventionist policies we've been discussing that, according to Dr. Sachs, have been a hallmark of U.S. foreign policy.
Precisely. Unlike the Western liberal democratic paradigm, which often links aid or cooperation to governance reforms and human rights conditionalities, many states in the Global South staunchly advocate for non-interference as a fundamental pillar of their alliances. They explicitly reject political conditionalities on their partnerships, prioritizing internal stability and focusing squarely on joint economic development, allowing each nation to pursue its own path without external coercion or pressure for internal political reform. It's a different philosophy of international relations.
So what are the implications for the United States in this rapidly shifting global landscape? What does this new order mean for Washington's long-held influence and its ability to shape global events?
Well, this reordering fundamentally reduces the effectiveness of unilateral sanctions, a key tool in Washington's foreign policy arsenal. Targeted nations can increasingly find alternative partners and financial pathways. Moreover, it significantly compromises Washington's long-held ability to lead broad international coalitions, as nations now have alternative partners and avenues for cooperation that don't come with the same political strings attached. By diversifying their partners and funding sources, the Global South gains greater strategic autonomy and is increasingly able to press for significant reforms in global governance, challenging the existing power structures and demanding a more equitable distribution of influence.
It suggests that the world Dr. Sachs described is no longer one where the U.S. unilaterally calls all the shots. It's a world where influence is distributed, where new power centers are rising, and where Washington's ability to exert its will is increasingly being tested and, at times, diminished. Okay, Dr. Jeffrey Sachs concludes his powerful observations with a call for what he terms an authentic America First foreign policy. Now, this isn't about isolationism or turning inward for its own sake, but a fundamental reorientation of priorities for the United States. So, conceptually, what would a genuine America First truly look like in practice, beyond just the rhetoric we've heard?
Well, conceptually, a genuine America First, as envisioned by Dr. Sachs, would involve redirecting U.S. policy and resources decisively towards the domestic well-being and comprehensive security of the American population, rather than continuously prioritizing what he argues are external agendas or the interest of a foreign-aligned deep state. This approach views national strength as originating from a healthy, prosperous, and secure citizenry, not from perpetual foreign intervention.
And a core part of that would begin with a profound redefinition of national security, wouldn't it? Moving from a vision that has historically been centered almost exclusively on global military projection and dominance, to one that deeply integrates economic, health, and social security for its own citizens.
Right. This would actively include crucial factors often overlooked by traditional security paradigms, such as building robust resilience against future pandemics, a global health crises, comprehensively addressing the existential threats posed by climate change, and strengthening domestic cybersecurity infrastructure to protect critical national systems. It's a holistic approach to security that recognizes that true national strength starts at home, with a healthy and secure populace.
And then a crucial reallocation of resources, which would represent a massive shift from current spending patterns, given the trillions we've discussed that have been spent abroad.
This would entail gradually, yet significantly, reducing the vast spending on foreign military operations, including overseas bases, interventions, and redirecting a substantial portion of those funds towards critical domestic infrastructure, investing in decaying transportation networks, modernizing energy grids, ensuring clean water systems across the nation. It also means prioritizing funding for vital public health networks and channels. Additionally, it would involve funneling resources into education, pioneering research, and technological development with a direct, measurable impact on creating high-quality jobs and improving the overall quality of life for Americans. This is about investing in the future of the nation itself.
This also points to a focus on social cohesion and equity within the United States. It's about rebuilding the social fabric at home.
That's right. It means strengthening welfare programs, for example, including comprehensive health insurance access for all, ensuring access to affordable housing, and bolstering social safety nets to actively mitigate inequality and pervasive job insecurity that plagued many communities. And crucially, it would involve fostering job creation in strategic national sectors, actively supporting small and medium-sized enterprises that are the backbone of the American economy, rather than relying solely on global supply chains or foreign markets.
What's also highlighted here is a strong emphasis on transparency and accountability. How would that manifest in this new approach?
Well, this would mean actively subjecting military and intelligence spending decisions to much greater parliamentary and public scrutiny. It would also involve implementing truly independent audits of defense contracts and foreign aid, ensuring citizen oversight to prevent waste, fraud, and the pursuit of agendas detached from the public interest. The goal is to bring these powerful systems out of the shadows and under democratic control.
And a significant shift towards active diplomacy and responsible multilateralism. This implies a different approach to global engagement.
Absolutely. This means consciously replacing armed interventions with robust diplomatic and development initiatives, such as conflict mediation, global health cooperation, or climate alliances, under clear mandates and with measurable, achievable objectives. It's about leading by example and collaboration, not coercion, and seeking shared solutions to global challenges through peaceful means.
So this means regaining America's moral leadership on the global stage, not through military might, but through a different kind of influence.
Yes, it's about fulfilling multilateral commitments and actively promoting democratic values, not through military force or regime change, but through persuasion, partnership, and consistent example without resorting to military coercion. It's a vision of America as a trusted partner and a model of democratic governance rather than a global hegemon.
Finally, fostering genuine community resilience at home. How does this connect to a redefined America First?
Well, this involves investing heavily in local infrastructure and developing robust emergency response systems to better prepare vulnerable communities for natural disasters or future health crises. It also means decentralizing resources to empower state and municipal governments, bringing solutions and decision-making closer to the real, immediate needs of the population. This creates a stronger, more adaptable nation from the ground up.
In sum, a genuine America First approach, as conceptualized by Dr. Sachs, demands prioritizing the quality of life and comprehensive security of Americans, and critically, rebuilding global credibility from a position of social and economic strength within the nation, rather than through endless, costly military interventionism abroad. It's a profound reimagining of America's role in the world. Hashtag tag outro. Wow, what a deep dive that was. Dr. Jeffrey Sachs provides us with a really critical perspective, doesn't he? Analyzing how U.S. foreign policy, in his view, has been profoundly influenced, not necessarily by generals or presidents acting alone, but by what he describes as foreign-aligned interests and an entrenched deep state that have pursued a decades-old plan. 7 potential wars, 6 of which he argues have been executed as debacles, leaving a world holding its breath for the last one against Iran.
This deep dive has indeed highlighted some profound patterns. The alleged subordination of U.S. policy to specific external interests. A specific blueprint for regional interventions that has been pursued over decades. The consistent failures of these interventions and their devastating human, financial, and reputational costs. And the undeniable emergence of a new global order challenging Washington's long-held unilateralism. It's certainly a complex picture of power, influence, and far-reaching consequences.
And this analysis forces us to ask a crucial question. If this perspective holds true, what does it truly mean for the American people, for their security, and for their place in a rapidly changing world? It's a call for a real shift in priorities, one that places the well-being of its own citizens above all else, rather than continuously serving what are described as external or deeply entrenched interests.
Right. And this raises an important question for you, the listener. How do you think these deeply entrenched interests and the pursuit of long-term strategic plans might continue to shape not just foreign policy, but also the challenges and opportunities facing nations, including your own, in the coming years? It's definitely something to mull over as you observe global events unfold.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, stay informed and think critically.